Tell me when. Well, yesterday, Jim, Pope Francis visited Strasbourg, France for just a mere 4 hours, a record time for any pope to come and visit a city. While he was there, he spoke to the parliament about different things such as the union of the European Union, and also about immigrants and migrants coming across the Mediterranean. He fears that the Mediterranean Sea is becoming a vast graveyard where migrants are dying on their way coming to Europe, and he encouraged Europe to become a more united front about this issue. He also talked about creating more jobs and just having a lot more of a united front, because he didn't feel as though as though Europe is as united and as much of a protagonist as it has been in the past. Yes, he has, Jim. That is correct. Well, the bullet points as far as the actual speech goes was definitely just about uniting Europe and making it more of, like I said, a protagonist, and becoming stronger as far as immigration goes into Europe. He also talked about the creation of jobs. But what is an interesting point of his visit yesterday is the fact that he didn't actually go to the cathedral in Strasbourg, which has upset quite a few Catholics. Thank you, Jim.
Well, there were actually thousands of visitors waiting to meet the Pope yesterday, but they were rather disappointed as the Pope was only in Strasbourg for 4 hours and he didn't visit the local cathedral. He did address the European Parliament after President Martin Schulz invited him a couple of weeks ago. He urged Europeans to be more open and more accepting of immigrants. His remarks came after the Greek authorities said that a cargo with 500 people was missing off the coast of the Mediterranean. He also talked about the importance of the creation of jobs, and he said he's actually very worried that Europe is becoming less and less of a protagonist in the world. Yes, he actually addressed the European Parliament and then he left back to the Vatican. He was there for only 4 hours. Well, he actually said that they haven't been doing much about it recently, and thousands of immigrants have lost their lives trying to reach Europe while crossing the Mediterranean.
Pope Francis visited the Council of Europe yesterday, which is Europe's main operating body on human rights. And he spoke principally about the state of Europe and the position that he believed Europe should be taking in regard to the vast amount of migrants that it receives. And this happened precisely as a cargo ship was being searched for off of the Greek coast containing 500 migrants. He called for Europe to take a stronger stance on the issue of welcoming migrants with open arms, precisely because he felt that Europe was losing its position as a continent responding strongly to human rights issues around the world. This contrasted greatly with the last time that a pope visited Strasbourg to speak to the Council of Europe, who was Pope John Paul II, who called Europe a beacon of civilization when he visited last. He didn't return in the Pope Mobile, as a matter of fact. He drove a Peugeot 407, a family car, and a typical representation of his humility that he's become known for. No, this was only his second time visiting Europe. Thank you, Jim.
Yes, Jim, roughly 25 years after the last Pope, Pope John Paul II, visited Strasbourg to address the European Parliament, Pope Francis has visited yesterday for only 4 hours to give a human rights speech discussing why the jobs need to be improved, the working conditions need to be improved, and why the migrants that are crossing the Mediterranean are dying in such numbers as they are. It's a huge problem, and for such a liberal pope, it was somewhat interesting to see how he was using strong language, even referring to the European Union as a grandmother, saying that it's losing its soul. So it was a very interesting speech. According to the Pope, the jobs are not being created in an effective manner. The working conditions are just deplorable, and he, from a human rights aspect, is just really asking for the European Council, the Council of Europe and the European Parliament to improve these situations so that these human beings just get what is deserved to them. Right, exactly. Well, in the past, Pope John Paul II was criticized by the Irish Prime Minister at that point, in which he was being told that he was too critical of the politics going on in the European Union. As of now, with Pope Francis, he was just taking it more from the human rights aspect, where he's asking from a human point of view that things need to be improved, even though he's not necessarily supposed to be a political figure, which was counted on by a topless protester prior to his arrival at the cathedral that he was talking at, in which the protester was on top of a statue, topless, with the Pope is not a politician across her chest, bare-breasted. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, yesterday, the Pope Francis paid a visit to Strasbourg, where he led a discussion at the European Parliament, and he talked about many topics of discussion. One main point being that there are many immigrants trying to come into Europe, but he feels that Europe is not being open about the situation, and he feels that Europe should be opening them with open arms. One point he made that the Mediterranean Sea is becoming a vast sea like a it's becoming a vast sea of like a dead sea, and he meant it's like a graveyard, and many people are dying when they're crossing the sea because they're coming in these little boats and they're not able to cross it because they're not letting them into the country. And another main point he made was that there's not enough jobs right now, and he feels that Europe should be making many jobs, but also a good job environment. So another thing that upset many people was that he did not visit any of the Catholic churches, and that was very upsetting to many of the population. No, he was actually only there for 4 hours. It was the quickest visit for any pope so far. It went much better last time a pope visited Strasbourg. There was a little bit of an upset during the speech. There was one man in Parliament who raised a little bit of an uproar, and he was actually kicked out. But this time, things went very smoothly. Thank you.
For a very brief trip. He was only there for 4 hours, and he focused mainly on immigration and creating jobs in Europe. He spoke to the European Council and European Parliament. He talked a lot about how Europe has become too rigid and needs to open up to immigrants, and how the Mediterranean has become a graveyard for migrants immigrating from Africa. And he also focused on how we need to create more jobs for unemployed people, and we can really feel the crisis here. And we've become we need to become more progressive. And we've lost the ways that we once had and our ideals that Europe once stood for. And he feels really strongly that that needs to change. And that's interesting because he is the most progressive Pope we've had yet. And that has been both controversial and also very positive, according to some people. It's had sort of mixed reviews. So yeah, that's very interesting. That's what happened. Well, no, he actually didn't attend any religious events. It was more for just political purposes, which is also very interesting because we haven't really seen that yet in a pope, just focusing more on political issues as opposed to just focusing on religious things. Well, like I said before, I think some people found it really controversial, and some people thought it was really positive that the Pope was so progressive and said such open things, and actually said that Europe needed to be more progressive and more open, whereas in the past, popes sort of just praised Europe for being such a wonderful place, and he also spoke well about Europe, but also had some more constructive criticism. Thank you.
I have to like Pope. Okay. Yeah. Yes, he visited Strasbourg for a mere 4 hours, where he went to the European Council and the European Parliament. In the Council, he mainly talked about migration issues. As he mentioned, all the illegal migrants crossing the Mediterranean Sea, with a lot of them dying on their way to trying to get into Europe. He called the Mediterranean a vast graveyard. He urged Europe to be more open towards these migrants, both socially and economically. He also talked to the Parliament about job creation and how investment is needed in jobs, and also the improvement workers need in their working conditions. He was surprisingly anti-austerity in his speech, going against the general economic line of Germany, who's the most influential country in the Parliament. He was also very critical of the Parliament, calling it elderly and haggard, and warning the Parliament of the increasingly low trust that the European citizens have for it as an institution. Probably he was, what did he say? Women cannot become priests within the Catholic Church, and I do not believe he opened for this in the very close future. No, he went to the Council and the Parliament before he left Strasbourg after a mere 4 hours. He did not visit any religious ceremonies or the cathedral in Strasbourg, which upset a lot of the local Catholics. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, he has. He spent 4 hours yesterday in Strasbourg in order to give 2 different speeches. He was invited by Martin Schulz, the President of the European Parliament, in order to speak about the issues that Europe has been currently facing. He mostly spoke about the job crisis that the European Union has and the migrant issues that we are also facing. This speech was quite controversial versus the other one that Pope John II did 25 years ago at the European Parliament. He went so far as to criticize Europe quite a lot, calling it a grandmother and how it has lost its fertility and vitality. He also went to say that the jobs that the migrants have been, oh my God. He also went as far to say that there has been a lot of migrant issues, calling the Mediterranean a vast graveyard. This Pope has been more critical because he is trying to change Europe and making it more critical. I have no clue. He's more critical. Thank you.
Yes. Well, Jim, I'm currently located in Paris, but Pope Francis was in Strasbourg yesterday delivering a speech to the European Union Parliament and another one to the Council of Europe. He called the Union elderly and haggard in regard to their failure to enact policies benefiting the less fortunate. He called for reform on immigration, specifically calling the Mediterranean a vast graveyard for migrants trying to reach Europe. He was very upset that Europe has taken a back seat where they used to be a protagonist in the world scheme. Well, other popes in the past, including Pope John Paul II, have called Europe a beacon of hope. However, Pope Francis is very concerned with humanitarian rights and has not seen Europe really taking a stance trying to help these people. Well, some people obviously were upset, but more people were really upset that he did not take the time out of his visit to visit religious sites in Strasbourg, including the local cathedral. Thank you, Jim. Yay.
That was good. That was very good.
Thanks. I know, so stuff doesn't freak me out.